This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bareboat Alaska. Up your DIY hunting game with one of their 37-foot adventure yachts. You and 5 of your friends can hunt, fish, set crab pots, shrimp pots, and take DIY to the next level. Bareboat Alaska is locally owned by a Ketchikan resident who lives here year-round. Call Larry at 907-617-4542 or go to bareboatalaska.com. That's B-A-R-E boatalaska.com and tell Larry you heard about it on this podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Nick Roberts. He's the editor of Bonefish and Tarpon Journal, the director of marketing and communications for Bonefish Tarpon Trust. Thanks for being on here.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to have you on because I was reading one of your pieces in Field and Stream about bonefish or about redfish. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty chilly up here still. It's starting to warm up a little bit. But when you start reading those things up here in Alaska about some warm water fisheries, and I'm sure it's not really warm. But man, I started thinking about redfish. So what's kind of the thing about the redfish sport fishery? Is it kind of a new thing? Is it a hip thing? Has it always been on and there's just more light being shown to it?
So I think it's probably the latter. Here in Charleston, where I'm based, the flood tide fishing is kind of like it's almost like a whole season that people get pumped up about. So for listeners, basically a flood tide is when there's what's called a spring tide, and it's so big that it actually floods the marshes bordering the rivers. And that allows redfish to get way up into the grass where they just gorge themselves on fiddler crabs. So while flood tides happen throughout the year, redfish don't really seem to want to get up into that grass until the water's a certain temperature. So April is when it really kicks off. So you'll see people wading, paddle boarding, pulling skiffs in 6 inches or 2 feet of water looking for redfish that get up into the grass, and they kind of let their guard down and do silly things like do headstands to eat crabs and just wag their tails like crazy. So I think to me, it's like the visual element of it is tough to beat. And they're also not especially picky most of the time. So if you have a pretty good cast kind of on that dinner plate in front of them, they're going to eat it, and just to see them explode in a couple feet of water is pretty fun.
How is it possible to fish for one of those? Because those can get pretty big. How can you fish from a paddleboard? Are you really standing on the paddleboard?
Yeah, you can either stand on a paddleboard, and what a lot of people will do is they'll take a 5-gallon bucket and then they'll lash it to that front, that kind of nylon cording on the front. And so they'll strip off all the line they need from the rod and then set it up in the bucket. So as soon as they see a fish, they can just lift the rod and use that bucket more or less as a casting bucket like you'd use on a skiff. So that lets you not have to fumble so much, and strip line and hold the paddle. And then in some situations, like I went yesterday, I didn't catch the fish, but I tried to sneak up on it. You can just actually ditch the paddleboard and kind of stalk the fish on foot. So it kind of depends on what type of flat you're on. Generally speaking, if the grass is short, the bottom is going to be hard enough to wade. But if the grass is taller, it's really, really sticky and you can sink like up to your waist. So definitely be careful wading in the marsh. But yeah.
Yeah. So when I think of East Coast fishing, I think of striper fishing in the Northwest or Northeast.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of overlap? It seems like the redfish is a little bit more of a southern, but do you get some good striper down there too?
I think I know there's lake locked stripers in parts of Georgia, for example, and Tennessee that get really big and they run up the rivers like from some of those TVA lakes. I do think that redfish would be, I think they don't get much past Virginia. And they're all the way from Florida up and over to Louisiana too, where I think they have the best fishery for those giant bull redfish in the fall, which is fun too. But yeah, it's just a great fish. I also think it's a great fish to learn how to flats fish with, because they're a lot slower than bonefish. They're not as picky, but a lot of the same techniques apply. Playing the right angles, making a good cast, usually in wind. So kind of a forgiving fish in some sense.
What's your favorite fish?
I think bonefish are probably my favorite. Just the speed and just seeing them tail in, 6 inches of water and belly crawl and stuff like that. That first run that a bonefish makes where all your line is gone from your reel in 3 seconds or 4 seconds it's tough to beat that thrill.
Yeah, I figured that would be a pretty good transition to to the warm water fish there. I
Yep.
think bonefish is something that people, if you're a fly fisherman, you have to figure out what you're going to, or fly fisher woman, you have to figure out what you're going to do with steelhead and bonefish. Because in the fly fishing world, those are two of the kind of iconic fish. And obviously up here we do a lot of steelhead fishing, but bonefish is just it has to be on the list, and you have to figure out if you're going to pursue it or not. How has the bone fishery changed down there? You hear a lot of stuff about habitat and about sustainability and pollution and our imprint. So have the good days passed? Are they long gone? Are there some recovery efforts? What's the situation?
Yeah, so Bonefish and Tarpon Trust was founded 25 years ago now, and it was founded in response to a decline in the bonefish fishery. So since that time, it has started to come back. I know the last few years there's really been a comeback in the Keys of seeing these smaller class fish, and just more plentiful numbers. So while I do think that kind of the best days are not currently here, I do think there's a lot of efforts underway to bring, to restore the fishery to its former glory. And as you might know, the Keys is where flats fishing was really born. So it's just incredibly important for the sport just to make sure this fishery remains healthy and viable. So I think a lot of it, like you were saying, is just protecting habitat. Also in the Keys, we're homing in on the basically the first documented Keys spawning site of bonefish. So we found spawning sites in the Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, other places, but have not found one in the Keys. And one thought is that the Keys had declined to the point where those fish had more or less stopped having the necessary numbers to spawn plentifully. So we're hot on the trail, and I think we were going to have some really exciting results to share soon on that. So I do think things are looking up, and I think also there's been a big cultural shift in how people handle bonefish. We're actually in the middle of a huge bonefish catch and release campaign right now, and we found through research that exposing bonefish to air for more than 10 seconds increases their likelihood of dying post-release by like 6 times. So just as you've probably seen too in the steelhead world and the trout world, I think there's a lot less of just the classic like hero shots where people are holding a dry fish, and there's a lot more emphasis on keeping fish wet. If you're going to get a picture, do it in 3 seconds and put the fish right back down on the water. So I think a lot of anglers are realizing that how individual behavior can really plays a part in the fishery. I mean, with so many thousands of people fishing every year, every fish counts, so.
Yeah. I was definitely the type of fisherman who, if you got into a good school of them, and they were just stuck right there. It was so much fun to see how many you could catch. You're catching 5-6 steelhead.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened, if I just had read enough of it, but then you kind of get to this point where you don't have to catch them all.
Exactly.
It's okay to get one and just be happy with that one, and then walk away with that feeling still. And I don't know if that's me getting old, or again that sort of an appreciation for what we have. And Dylan
Hmm.
Tomini in his book talks about, we're all just kind of fishing for the crumbs right now. In some areas, the crumbs are
Hmm.
really, really good still, but compared to what it was, it's very small. I'm
Hmm.
amazed at the whole spawning thing with the bonefish, because up here in Southeast, we know where the fish spawn. It's easy. We see
Hmm.
them all the time. So to not even know where that is and not really know what habitat to protect has got to be
Hmm.
really difficult. And the
Hmm.
same thing with what we have done as humans to try to enhance or try to help has not helped. Our hatchery
Hmm.
program has diluted the genetics of the wild fish, and so your king salmon and your steelhead specifically have just been, ravaged by the hatchery that's supposed to help them and help the numbers. Well, actually, not really help them, just help the numbers.
Hmm.
And that's been one of the worst things for it. But it seems counterintuitive. So have there been any sort of, I don't want to say enhancement programs, or like what has happened outside of just, take care of them when and if you catch them, and then try to keep the habitat up?
So yeah, there hasn't been any sort of like stocking programs, and I don't think there ever will be or needs to be. But I think that what people have focused on is protecting, and I'm speaking generally, including the Bahamas, Belize, and Mexico, is finding those sites where they spawn. And just to give a quick summary on how bonefish spawn, because it's pretty fascinating. So bonefish have pretty small home flats, and they more or less hang out on the same flats all the time. And of course, that changes with the tide cycle. When they spawn, they'll travel up to 70 miles or more to all meet at a near shore spawning site. So this is not necessarily on a flat, it's kind of in deeper water off the edge of a flat. And then at night, that school will migrate offshore and then spawn in about, roughly 400 feet of water in open ocean. So the process is very complicated. There you have fish coming from multiple locations. So that's why locating these, they're called PSA, pre-spawning sites. That's where the fish meet up near shore before they head offshore at night. Finding and protecting those sites is critical, because without us, if that site is like getting run over by a boat all the time, or just getting degraded in some other sense, you're basically ruining the meetup spot for all these fish coming from different areas and different flats. So in the Bahamas, we've identified numerous sites like that, and have helped get some of them protected under national park protections, which is one way to do it. And then the other thing that we've done is locate in the Bahamas like the main pathways that these fish are traveling to reach those sites, and ensure that their pathway to get there is protected too. Once they head off into the open ocean, it's kind of hard to track from there, and you're not going to like protect the whole ocean. But that's one thing, is just locating and protecting those PSAs. And then when it comes to juvenile bonefish, it's the same thing. It's finding these kind of sandy bays and sheltered areas along mangroves where baby bonefish, after they've transformed from larvae, which is how they hatch from eggs, basically finding these sites that are kind of like nurseries and making sure those are protected, because these tiny bonefish need these like sheltered leaves and things like that to grow up in.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Have you been working with
And none of this was known until BTT was founded. So in the scheme of 25 years, it went from knowing almost nothing about bonefish to figuring out that they spawn in 400 feet of water in the ocean, which is just crazy for a fish that lives in, a foot of water.
Mm-hmm.
So
have you found there's been pretty good cooperation with other countries? For, here in Alaska, we have the mutual interest in salmon as Canada. And so if the fish are coming by us, but then they're going up rivers that start in Canada, and that's where we're going to spawn. So we have the mutual, need to protect the spawning habitat, but it's, way up there. But then if they develop or they mine or if they log, it's going to affect not only their run, but also the fish because they're coming all the way out. So have you found that it's been pretty cooperative?
Yeah, it's been great. BTT's had a lot of collaborators in those various countries. We've worked in the Bahamas for so long too. And one of the ways to kind of quantify it is we've done economic impact studies on the value of the flats fishery. So in the Bahamas, our last study, which was a few years ago, showed that the flats fishery generates $169 million annually for the Bahamas. And so when you can really put a price tag on how valuable bonefish are and, the whole fishery, I think that can help with our partners there to really see that, it's in the country's best interest to protect habitat because there are just so many anglers from around the world coming to fish there. And then these fisheries also support entire communities, having the profession of guide is, a very sustainable livelihood there. These lodges attract people from all over the world. So I think putting a price tag on it, as we've also done in Mexico recently, just really bolsters the argument of why protecting these resources is important, not only from a conservation standpoint, but from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, that's the thing that we run into here. Of course, it's the fish so economically important, but there are areas that communities that are logging communities, and then the economic benefit in Canada of putting in mines because we need the materials, we need the oil and everything. So it just makes it such a difficult. Both are economic benefit, but once we ruin this potentially forever, and we'll never get it back. So the short term, it might not be worth the long term. We also have issues with bycatch. So you've had East Coast trawlers that have just pretty much wiped out the cod population out there. It's happening over here a little bit with halibut, and you just have the trawlers that are just wiping clean the bottom of the oceans, and then you have gill netters and seine netters that are getting steelhead as bycatch. Do you have commercial fishermen that are dealing with that sort of bycatch type thing, or because you don't have salmon, you don't really is that a concern at all, commercial fishing?
I think it would be more so about forage fish for tarpon, like menhaden. I know BTT is active in really improving the management of that fishery. So menhaden are an extremely valuable forage fish, not only for tarpon, but for numerous other sport fish. And so I think that menhaden need to be sustainably harvested, because when you're wiping out forage fish, that obviously that's going to have effects all the way up the food chain to tarpon, which are an incredibly valuable sport fish from Florida all the way up to Virginia and over to Texas too. So I think it would apply more to forage fish than probably actually fishing for the sport fish. But I know, getting back to redfish, that North Carolina guides, including one of my friends who's a guide, has struggled with some of the regulations there because a lot of redfish are actually caught in gill nets in North Carolina when people are fishing for other species like spot. And so a lot of guides there have mobilized to reform management there, because you're wiping out schools of 5 to 10 pound what are called puppy redfish, which are the juvenile redfish that people flats fish for a lot before they become those monster 30 pounders that are bull redfish. So I do think there's some issues there with the redfish fishery in North Carolina, which is our state, just our neighbor just to the north. So, and that's where I grew up. So
have you been out west to trout fish, steelhead fish, salmon fish?
Yeah, I've trout fished a lot out west. I was actually born in Northern California, and love fishing like the Truckee River in the Sierra Nevadas, and I've been to Pyramid Lake a few times too, and then fished. My dad's family's from Montana, so fished out in Montana a lot. I did book one steelhead trip 2 years ago with a writer friend, Chris Santella, who you might know too. And unfortunately, the water level was so low and the returns of fish were so low that we just canceled the whole trip. So that was my one experience to go out to Portland and fish with Chris. So we're going to try to rebook that trip. But I know that steelhead have gone through an awful lot the past few years, especially.
Yeah. We have pretty low water right here. There's so much snow. We got a ton of snow, but it just hasn't warmed up enough to really get a nice runoff yet. So there are a couple pockets of steelhead, but it's not full bore yet. And that can happen here if you have just a little bit of a late winter. It just doesn't unlock things. And living on an island, the river's a lot smaller. And so they're a lot more, they just drain out so much faster. And so until the snow really starts melting, sometimes the steelhead run is a little bit late. And so you can book your tickets and then come up here and nothing's
happening. Yeah. I'd love to fish Alaska someday. I still have not made it. I've gone to South America a few times and hosted some trips there, but for some reason I've not gone north. I need to go stop going south as much.
It's cold, but it's pretty nice. Yeah, you can get some stuff. Everyone talks about the Tongass, but I think that the Tongass can be difficult to kind of navigate. People know and they've heard about it, and it's pristine, but you're looking at smaller rivers and you don't have the same level of access, such as a matter of renting a car or whatever. And then Bristol Bay, I have never even been up there, and that's in my state, just so far away. With those rivers, legendary, of course. But when's the best time to go and how do you do it? I don't know. But I used to live in California, so I did some
cool
fishing up in the Truckee River. Was a lot of fun, in Upper Sacramento, and just the story of the rainbows from the McCloud River is great. That they've pretty much supplied and stocked the world. Such a beautiful fish.
Yeah, and then Pyramid Lake having that amazing comeback of the original Lahontan cutthroat trout, which were believed to be extinct for decades. It's pretty cool to see those monsters come back.
I don't know about fishing on the paddle boards and ladders. I don't know about fishing.
Yeah, the ladder thing is weird. I've done that a few times. It's strange when you hook a fish and then if you want to actually walk down the shore, you're kind of like walking backwards down a ladder in 4 feet of water. It's kind of bizarre, but
yeah, you got to try everything once, right?
Exactly.
It's too expensive, but so you need to get up to Alaska.
Definitely.
So if I were to head down there and I'm looking for a redfish, what would be my rod reel combo?
Sure.
As far as weights, sizes, things like that.
So the most common rod and reel for redfish would be an 8-weight, just a large arbor reel too. And like any saltwater reel, you want your drag to be sealed. Obviously, with saltwater, it's so corrosive. So I like a 9-foot 8-weight, 8.5 foot would be fine too. They don't run, like they're rarely going to take you all of the way to your backing. So you don't need like a crazy amount of backing or anything like that. I would just say a large arbor reel with a sealed drag. as far as leaders go, like a 9-foot, 16-pound leader is pretty standard around here. You could go down to 12 if they're being especially spooky, but it's usually not necessary. And then as far as flies go, most of the time you're imitating crabs or shrimp. So in the grass, there's millions of these tiny little kind of purplish, brownish, whitish fiddler crabs. And you'll actually see the crabs clinging to the blades of grass for dear life when the water's rising, because they know the fish are coming. And so they'll just be like hanging onto the grass, and you'll actually see sometimes a redfish pop them off the blades of grass, which is cool. So the flies, Orvis and various fly shops sell a bunch of them. Like some famous ones are the Quan, which is just kind of an impressionistic shrimp pattern, a shrimp/crab pattern. There's also, let's see, what are some other good ones? A copperhead, which is kind of a copper shrimp looking fly that has like kind of some copper crystal flash in it. So, like I was saying before, they're not nearly as like picky as a bonefish or a permit. It's more about just getting that good presentation. And, I think that the hardest part of fishing for them in the grass too is just the grass itself, because they'll literally bury their head in dense grass. So sometimes you can have the best cast in the world, but your cast will land on a blade of grass and the fly won't quite penetrate down to where the fish is looking. Right. So that can be kind of frustrating. But as far as the flies go, there's dozens of really good redfish patterns out there.
So would I be able to do similar fishing for bonefish with the same rig? Like maybe just the fly a little bit, but okay. But then tarpon, I'd have to bring the big boy out.
Yeah, tarpon, you'd want a 10 weight. Bonefish are fine with an 8. Tarpon, you want to go up, and then if you're fishing for like those really, really giant ones, people go up to a 12 weight.
Nice. Yeah. Do you have those giant ones in that Florida area, or do you have to go further south?
Yeah, Florida has I would say probably the biggest ones people are catching now would be on the west coast of Florida, certain parts of the Keys, and then as you know, tarpon migrate thousands of miles too. So they actually migrate here through South Carolina. So some of the fish that we've tagged in the Keys for research have actually showed up all the way up in Virginia, which is just incredible that a fish can, travel that far seasonally and then go back to Florida. So some of those fish are caught here on fly. It's not as popular to do it on fly just because it's not as much of a sight fishery, because the water in South Carolina is more stained because of the rivers coming in, whereas Florida, it's crystal clear. But yeah, they're definitely pass through every season.
Excellent. Well, where can people find the Bonefish Tarpon Trust? How can they get involved? And give me a little pitch for that.
Sure. Yeah. So our website is very simple. It's btt.org. We're a membership-based organization similar to Trout Unlimited or DU. So we have lots of different membership levels. The membership supports BTT's research, advocacy, and education programs. We have some great corporate sponsors who we've worked with for years, including Patagonia, Orvis, Sims. We often partner with them to come up with some cool membership benefits, cap shirts, things like that. And we also are working toward getting our first ever Florida license plate passed. We're almost there. So pretty soon people will be seeing BTT license plates on boat trailers and trucks in Florida, which will be pretty exciting too for the brand.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on here, Nick. Really appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to fellow anglers from different backgrounds and from different fish pursuits. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jeff. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me and for covering BTT.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good one.
Okay. Take care. Bye.